what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, the palm trees and the lovely blue sky. It's a bit windy today, but we've got to go.
The car has driven. The engine has run. The coolant temperature has settled. 7.7 million people watched it happen in 4 days. And now Matt Armstrong is standing at the finish line of the most extraordinary automotive rebuild in YouTube history, facing something that none of the previous obstacles prepared him for. Not a locked VIN, not a refused parts request, not a CEO Instagram video, not a fractured aluminium bracket or a hybrid battery controller, or a catch-22 or manufacturer saying no for the second time in the same story. Something different, something more fundamental, something that does not announce itself with a corporate statement or a phone call from a manufacturer representative, but sits quietly in the structure of the car itself and in the bureaucratic architecture of UK road law and in the specific combination of factors that make the final stage of this rebuild genuinely harder than every stage that came before it. The Bugatti rebuild is not impossible in the way Bugatti said it was impossible. It is impossible in a completely different way, a way they never mentioned. And that specific impossibility is why the story is not finished yet. Think about what impossible actually means in the context of this build, because the word has been used a lot. Bugatti used it. Their CEO used it specifically and publicly and in detail in a 10-minute Instagram video about why the chassis could not be split, and the systems could not be calibrated, and the rebuild could not be done safely outside their authorized network. And Matt Armstrong answered every version of that impossibility. The chassis that could only be split at 2 facilities in the entire world came apart in Leicester with a rubbish bin. The gearbox bracket that could not be TIG welded was TIG welded. The parts that could not be sourced outside the official supply chain were sourced through 8 different brands, including an 11-pound Amazon bolt. The systems that required factory calibration were addressed through a combination of specialist knowledge and community expertise and creative engineering that Bugatti's official process had never anticipated. All of those impossibilities fell, one by one, on camera, in front of millions of people. And now the car is driven. And the impossibility that remains is not one that can be overcome with a rubbish bin or a TIG weld or an Amazon order. It requires something that Matt Armstrong cannot engineer or source or fabricate or find in a publicly available database. It requires permission. The BCM reset is a specific technical wall that defines a current impossibility, the body control module reset, the procedure that recalibrates the central electronic brain of the Bugatti Chiron after the rebuild process has replaced and repaired and reconfigured the systems that the BCM manages. Without the BCM reset, the warning lights that populated the dashboard during the first drive cannot all be cleared. The systems that need to confirm their calibration cannot confirm it. The electronic integration that makes the car function as the seamlessly integrated whole it was designed to be rather than a collection of individually operational components cannot be achieved. And the BCM reset requires proprietary tools, Bugatti proprietary tools. Tools that exist inside their authorized network and nowhere else. Tools that Bugatti has refused to make available for the specific car's rebuild. The second no, after everything. And without the BCM reset the car that has already done the hardest thing. The thing Bugatti said was impossible cannot do the next thing. The thing the law requires before it can be driven on a public road. And that specific gap between a car that drives and a car that can legally be driven is where the current impossibility lives. Now let us talk about the IVA, because the individual vehicle approval process is the bureaucratic wall that sits between Matt Armstrong's driving Bugatti Chiron per Sport, and a car that can be legally registered for road use in the United Kingdom. IVA is the process by which vehicles that cannot be registered through standard type approval, salvage rebuilds, heavily modified cars, unique configurations that do not conform to the original specification, are assessed for compliance with the safety and technical standards required for road use in the UK. The assessment is thorough. It covers lighting, emissions, safety systems, structural integrity, the condition and specification of components across the entire vehicle. And it is conducted by inspectors who are looking for compliance with specific standards rather than with the original manufacturer specification, which means that some of the creative solutions that made this rebuild possible, the cross-reference parts from 8 brands, the handmade radiators, the Valvetronic exhaust, the custom interior, the Audi A3 airbags, all of them need to be assessed not against what Bugatti would put in the car, but against what UK road law requires of a vehicle seeking road legal status. And that assessment for a car with a specific history and a specific configuration is not a straightforward process. The emissions question is the one that sits at the center of the IVA challenge in a way that the physical and structural elements of the build do not. Because the Bugatti Chiron Per Sport was not originally sold in the United Kingdom. It was not type approved for UK roads. It was a US specification car. And US specification vehicles and UK specification vehicles are not identical in their emissions calibration and their emissions compliance. The specific standards that the car was built to meet in its original market may not align precisely with what the IVA process requires for UK road registration. And emissions compliance in a car with a W16 engine and 4 turbochargers and a specific calibration that has been rebuilt around it through months of independent engineering is not something that can simply be assumed. It needs to be demonstrated through specific testing, with specific equipment, and with specific documentation that the original manufacturer's official process would normally provide, but that this specific car does not have access to through normal channels because of the VIN lock and the parts refusal and every other tool Bugatti has deployed throughout this story. But here is what the Bugatti Veyron situation adds to this picture of impossibility, because the impossibility of the Chiron rebuild is not a unique situation that exists only for that specific car. It is a pattern. Matt Armstrong rang Bugatti about parts for his repossessed Veyron. Bugatti told him they would not supply parts to someone outside their network. The Veyron would have to be on-site and serviced by the company. Same answer, same policy. Same wall, different car, and that repetition of the same refusal across 2 different Bugatti projects makes the impossible not just a challenge that Matt Armstrong faces, but a structural feature of how Bugatti operates as a company. A deliberate, consistent, enforced feature of their relationship with any independent operator who tries to work on their cars without their authorization. The Chiron refusal was not a one-time response to an extraordinary situation. It is how Bugatti treats independent repair across their entire product range. And the Veyron's no-gear issue fixed with a new fuse, and its leaky radiator, and its fuse box problem, and its misfiring are all problems that Matt Armstrong cannot get official support for, because the official support requires bringing the car to Bugatti. And bringing the car to Bugatti is not the plan. The plan is the same plan it has always been. Make the parts themselves. Source them through alternative channels. Find the window in the wall, and keep going. The legal loophole dimension of the Veyron situation deserves specific attention, because what Matt Armstrong discovered when he investigated the parts supply situation for the Veyron is something that the automotive community had not fully understood before he documented it publicly. The mechanism by which Bugatti prevents independent rebuild is not just a corporate policy enforced through business relationships with their dealer network. It has a legal dimension. A specific legal framework that gives Bugatti the basis for restricting part supply in ways that go beyond simple commercial discretion. A legal loophole, as Matt Armstrong described it. A way for Bugatti to prevent an independent rebuild of one of its cars that is not just a preference, but a right exercise within an existing legal framework. And that specific discovery, that the impossibility has a legal structure to it that goes beyond the VIN lock and the corporate instruction to dealers, is the detail that makes the EU right to repair directive so specifically targeted at this exact situation. Because the directive does not just change the cultural or commercial calculation around independent repair. It changes the legal framework. It removes the loophole. It makes the legal basis for the restriction invalid. And it does so on July 31st, 2026, which is now less than 3 months away. Now let us talk about what Matt Armstrong's father, Tony, contributes to this story. Because Tony Armstrong is not a passive figure in the current impossibility. He is an active participant whose specific skills and whose specific relationship with his son are part of why the impossible keeps getting solved, even when the solutions are not obvious. Tony Armstrong is a mechanic, a skilled one, someone who has been working on cars his entire adult life, and who passed that passion and that practical knowledge down to his son through the specific, irreplaceable education of doing it together in a real workshop. And Tony's involvement in the final stages of this build, in the creative fabrication, and the problem solving and the specific mechanical challenges that the IVA preparation requires, is a detail that the coverage of this story often overlooks in favor of the corporate drama. But the workshop expertise that makes impossible things possible is not Matt Armstrong's alone. It is shared, built across 2 generations of the same family. And in the final stages of the most complex build either of them has ever attempted, that shared expertise is exactly what is needed. The transmission story is worth revisiting at this point, because the 14 titanium bolts that hold the Chiron's front and rear sections together, discovered during the chassis split that Bugatti said required specialized equipment available at only 2 facilities in the world, tell a story about the nature of the impossibility that defines this build. The bolts were accessible. The modular design that Bugatti's engineering team created for the Chiron, a design that makes the cars serviceable by their trained technicians at those 2 specific facilities, also makes it accessible to someone who understands the architecture well enough to find the bolts and remove them in the right sequence. The impossible was not impossible because of the physics. It was impossible because of the information, because knowing where the bolts are and what sequence to remove them in and what to disconnect before you start is information that Bugatti had and Matt Armstrong did not, until he got in the car and started finding out. And the BCM reset and the IVA preparation and every remaining challenge in this build have the same character. Not impossible because of physics. Impossible because of information. And information, unlike physics, can be found. The community dimension of the current impossibility is worth addressing directly, because the audience has been contributing technical knowledge throughout this build, flagging concerns, sharing specialist information, connecting Matt Armstrong with people who have the specific expertise his build needs, is now facing the same challenge he is. The BCM Reset Challenge is one that the community has been discussing in detail. The IVA preparation